Much of the international conversation surrounding China's foreign policy revolves around Taiwan. Yet focusing too narrowly on the Taiwan Strait may obscure a broader and more decisive consideration: China's long-term strategy for regional transformation. In the view of many observers, Beijing's approach is not driven by a desire for immediate confrontation, but by a calculated and far-reaching effort to alter the geopolitical order of the Western Pacific. While media narratives often speculate about when, or whether, Beijing will move on Taiwan, the Chinese leadership appears in no rush. Patience is not hesitation. Instead, it reflects a belief that current conditions do not yet support a decisive or irreversible outcome. From Beijing's perspective, any military action that fails to fundamentally change the broader regional architecture could ultimately prove counterproductive. To understand this posture, it is important to view Taiwan not in isolation but as part of a much larger strategic equation. In this view, Taiwan is not simply a disputed territory or a domestic political issue. It is a node within the larger framework of American presence and influence in the Indo-Pacific. Without addressing that presence, any effort to bring Taiwan under political control risks remaining temporary and incomplete. A limited campaign against Taiwan could indeed bring swift battlefield gains, but it could also trigger broad international condemnation. Such a move would hand Washington and its allies a powerful justification to coordinate sanctions, reduce trade, and harden global opinion. Instead of dividing the international community, it could unite it against Beijing. For China, the strategic cost of such an outcome would outweigh the benefits of even a successful military occupation. Moreover, history has shown that controlling territory does not always mean controlling outcomes. Occupation, particularly one that lacks widespread legitimacy, can foster long-term resistance. Even if military objectives are met, political consolidation may remain elusive. In Taiwan's case, independence-leaning groups would likely continue operating underground or from abroad, supported by sympathetic foreign actors. Beijing is keenly aware of the risks of winning the battle, only to lose the narrative, and potentially the peace. This is why Chinese strategists may see greater advantage in waiting for a moment of structural opportunity. A scenario in which the United States is deeply engaged elsewhere, perhaps in a European conflict or a Middle Eastern crisis, could reduce American capacity to respond effectively in East Asia. Under such circumstances, a regional move by China would carry far less risk of direct confrontation with Washington, and far less likelihood of unified opposition from its allies. In that context, a broader confrontation between China and the United States would be seen not as regional aggression, but as great power competition. The framing would change. And with that shift in framing, the international response could change as well. Many countries, especially those with close trade ties to China, might choose neutrality. Some would hesitate to take sides. Others, quietly skeptical of U.S. global leadership, might even welcome a recalibration of power in the Pacific. This is why strategic timing matters. Acting too soon risks alienating potential partners, galvanizing rival coalitions, and suffering economic blowback. Acting at the right moment, however, could lead to a major shift in regional influence with relatively less resistance. In international affairs, perception often shapes policy. If Beijing appears to be responding to a shifting global order rather than forcing it, its actions may be seen as part of a larger realignment rather than a sudden threat. Beijing's military preparations reflect this understanding. The steady construction of aircraft carriers, modernization of missile systems, enhancement of cyber capabilities, and expansion of naval presence are not aimed solely at Taiwan. They are part of a broader deterrence strategy, one designed to project strength across the entire Indo-Pacific and to dissuade others from challenging China near its maritime frontiers. When China conducts large-scale exercises that stretch deep into the Pacific, it is not simply preparing for a short-term conflict. It is signaling that any engagement will be multidimensional, wide-ranging, and difficult to contain. This also explains China's reluctance to engage in isolated skirmishes with smaller neighbors. While tensions persist in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, Beijing has largely avoided escalations that could allow the United States to frame China as an aggressor. Confronting a small state like the Philippines or Vietnam, without also confronting the U.S. presence behind them, would likely yield little strategic gain but considerable diplomatic risk. A conflict that appears one-sided opens the door for Washington to lead a broad international response. In contrast, confronting the United States directly, if done under favorable circumstances, presents a fundamentally different dynamic. In that case, the balance of power becomes the issue, not just territorial ambition. And in such a situation, countries may reassess their positions. While few would openly endorse confrontation, many may adopt a pragmatic stance, choosing not to jeopardize their own interests by aligning too closely with either side. Sanctions, too, are not guaranteed. While Western democracies have taken strong economic measures against Russia, the calculus with China is more complex. China is far more deeply integrated into global supply chains, particularly in critical sectors like electronics, rare earths, pharmaceuticals, and green energy. A comprehensive sanctions regime against Beijing would be painful not only for China, but for much of the global economy. Policymakers in Asia, Africa, and even parts of Europe would face difficult trade-offs. This interdependence gives Beijing room to maneuver, but only if it avoids triggering premature conflict. If it is perceived as destabilizing the region without provocation, even reluctant partners may feel compelled to respond. However, if Beijing is seen as asserting itself in response to external weakness or shifting global realities, the response may be far more measured. This is why China's current strategy appears rooted in caution. While domestic voices may call for immediate action, the leadership likely views such impulses as short-sighted. The ultimate objective is not just reunification or military victory, it is the long-term rebalancing of power in the Western Pacific. Taiwan, in this sense, is not the goal but the tipping point. From this vantage, strategic patience is not a passive posture. It is an active form of preparation. It buys time for diplomacy, for military readiness, for technological self-sufficiency, and for building resilience against external shocks. It also allows China to deepen relationships across the global south and develop alternatives to Western-led economic systems. These moves are all part of a plan that stretches beyond any single island or crisis. What we are witnessing is not a delay, but a deliberate sequencing of priorities. For China's leadership, the success of any future action will depend not just on weapons or tactics, but on international conditions. The desired outcome is not short-term triumph but long-term irreversibility. In this context, Taiwan remains central, but only as part of a larger equation. The real objective is to shift the balance of power in the Western Pacific. Until that is possible, Beijing is likely to continue waiting, building, and watching. When the right moment comes, if it comes, the decision will not be driven by emotion or public pressure. It will reflect years of planning, careful observation, and a clear calculation that the outcome will be decisive, sustainable, and, above all, strategic.